All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion. We are pleased that you're able to join us today and sincerely apologize for the delay in our start. A quick reminder that this is being recorded. The recording will be available upon request. If you'd like to access the recording, Tara can add my contact information to the chat. And in case you already don't have it, you'll have it there. Now let's get started because we have a lot of information to cover and we're a little bit late. All right, we are joined by some incredible individuals, each bringing a wealth of experience and their own unique perspective. Before we dive in, I'll ask each of them to quickly introduce themselves. I'll start it off. My name's Danielle Hilliard, and I'm the Education Program Manager at Gymnastics Ontario. I'm a former national level gymnast and recreational gymnastics coach. I took up cheerleading in university, and I ended up on Cheer Canada's national co-ed team, earning 3 world titles at the ICU World Cheerleading Championships. Over the years, I've worn many different hats: athlete, coach, administrator, and I'm really excited to be here having this conversation with you all. So Mark, I have him on the phone, and if you could quickly introduce yourself and your organization, that would be amazing.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark McGuire. I'm the Executive Director of a not-for-profit called Give and Go Sport Education. And what we do at Give and Go Sport Education is we advocate for the physical, mental, and emotional health of kids in sport. We do that by promoting a seasonal multi-sport participation model. I am a former professional European hockey player and coach. I've been a learning facilitator with the Coaching Association of Canada for decades and a course conductor, as we were called, with the Ontario Minor Hockey Association. And I look forward to having this conversation. It's something that's very important and topical for all of us. Thank you, Danielle, for the invitation.
All right, thank you so much, Mark. Jen, you're up next.
Hey everybody, my name is Jennifer Hopkins. I have over 30 years of experience coming from the background of rhythmic gymnastics as a former national team member for Canada. I represented Canada at the 1987 World Championships, and then I moved into coaching. And then I'm still involved in coaching as well as a master coach developer. I'm also educating young coaches to become, or to help our young athletes to become better in our sport and to, I guess, contribute even more so to not just the sport aspect of it, but also the overall well-being, which is something that I love to advocate for. I'm also a proud mom of 5. I teach at high school level, and my daughter took her gymnastics skills and is now a world medalist in wrestling. Yes, wrestling. So I look forward to all of our conversations, and hopefully you guys have a great time today.
Thank you so much, Jen. Kate, can you please introduce yourself and your experience?
Sure. Hi, my name's Kate. I'm really excited to be here. My background goes far back into gymnastics. I started when I was 7, competed all the way through to 18. At 18, I found cheerleading and did cheerleading until I was in my 30s. During that time, I've also worked for the Toronto Blue Jays charitable arm, and within that role, I worked a lot in sport for development programs, so building sport programs to increase protective factors for young people. My particular role niched into the realm of youth suicide and using sport as a way to help kids overcome some of the mental barriers that they were facing. That led me into getting my counseling degrees, and now I'm a psychotherapist specializing in sport performance. And it's something I'm really passionate about and really excited to be here, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. And I'm sure most of you know her, but Heather, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi. Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited to be part of this group of amazing people here. And I see a lot of people in the attendees too that are former teammates, coach developers I've worked with, and there's a really experienced audience here too. So I'm looking forward to the conversations. I was a national team athlete in trampoline for over 15 years. I one of the first women, sort of a trailblazer in Canadian trampoline, was the first Canadian woman to compete a triple, and one of the first in the world, set world record difficulties as a teenager, and continued on after a break from trampoline and coming back, competed at 7 world championships and the Olympic Games when I was 30 years old, where I was a finalist. So I've taken now that sort of sport experience, that sort of unique pathway, I guess, or and looked at what other athletes are doing, and I think really promoting quality sport. I've seen the best and the worst in my athlete experience, and one of the things I wanted to do as a coach and a leader in sport is to make sure that athletes out there get the best rather than the low points that I would have experienced as an athlete myself. So quality sport and choosing sport for yourself is something that's really important to me.
Wonderful. And last but certainly not least, we have our education and social media coordinator here at Gymnastics Ontario and my personal savior. Can you introduce yourself, Tara?
That's very kind. Thank you. Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Tara. As Danielle mentioned, I work alongside her at Gymnastics Ontario. But prior to that, I grew up a competitive athlete, mainly in hockey, until I found rowing and pursued that further into college athletics, where I received a Division I scholarship, and that led into my education, which led me to get degrees in sport management, communications, and a master's degree in sport product development. And from there, I transitioned into Gymnastics Ontario, where I got to meet all these lovely people and be in this conversation today. So I'm really excited.
Awesome. So Tara will be keeping an eye on the chat, and in case any of you have any questions, feel free to jot those down in there. There will be time at the end, hopefully allocated for a Q&A. But yeah, let's get started. To begin today's session, I'd like to take a moment to introduce Give and Go Sport Education. Give and Go is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to promoting physical, mental, and emotional well-being of children in sport. Through its advocacy, Give and Go encourages a seasonal multi-sport participation model, one that fosters a universally safer, more engaging, and developmentally appropriate experience for youth in sport. As part of our discussion today, we'll be viewing selected clips from the Give and Go documentary and exploring themes that are highly relevant to our own sport community. At this time, I'm pleased to welcome the Executive Director of Give and Go Sport Education. Mark, could you please share some more about the mission of your organization and highlight some of the exciting initiatives that you currently have underway?
Yeah, certainly, Danielle. And thanks to you and Gym Ontario and the other panelists for agreeing to join us in this session. It's something that's, I and a growing number of people in amateur sport find to be very important. And I think it's important we position this as, unfortunately, it's a first world problem. We know that there are children in the world who have not enough access to food, and we know there are children who have not enough access, too much access to food. And similarly, there are children in the world who don't have access to sport. And unfortunately, we have some children who have access to too much sport. And the theme for today's conversation and many of my recent conversations is the latter. It's too much sport at too young of an age. I'm certainly you're all familiar with this notion of specialization, in particular early specialization. So a few years ago, myself and a couple of colleagues wanted to do something. We had a bit of a call to action through conversations with like-minded organizations, with parents, with volunteers and sport administrators, that we're finding that in far too many instances, more and more younger kids, first and foremost, before they're athletes, they're kids, are participating in too much sport at too young of an age. And so what we did is we created a documentary, and we spoke with a number of organizations in this same space. I'm assuming you all know Sport for Life, and Respect Group, and Active for Life. And they all said, Mark, if you're to make a documentary, we want you to consider the following 4 demographic groups as your primary audience. And they all, in fact, by the way, agreed in this order. The first group is moms between the ages of 25 and 45. They seem to be the decision influencers and decision makers on where kids participate in sport. The second group then is sport volunteers. So coaches, referees, trainers, judges, umpires, whatever the sport calls for, whom, by the way, seem to be the partner or the significant other of the first group. So mom signs up the child for the activity, and dad or partner takes them to the activity. The third group then is educators, and educators can be classic educators with chalk at the front of a classroom, but they can also be people who work in community centers. They can be people who work at the YMCA or YWCA, anybody really who's involved in recreational physical activity with children and their community. And then the last group is grandparents, because grandparents have become the ride share, the Lyft, or the Uber drivers for where these children participate in sports. So there's a lot of windshield time to the venue and home from the venue. So that's really the target audience of the documentary. It's about 34 minutes in length. There are about 19 different talents in the documentary. I call them participants, but I was corrected. They're to be called talents. And those talents are professional athletes, they are Olympic athletes, they are NSOs, they are groups like the Coaching Association of Canada, Participation, Parachute, Jumpstart Charities, Canadian Mental Health Association. All of these organizations agree that collectively we need to put more attention and focus on this transition, this shift, hopefully from the early specialization model to a multi-sport participation model. And I think it's important that at the outset, I make it clear that we're not here wagging any fingers or pointing at anyone saying what's happening is wrong. Rather, we have a really good system here, and I firmly believe that in Ontario and in Canada with amateur sport. However, there needs to be continuous improvement. So it's our intent at Give and Go to go from good to better and better to best. And we believe that the documentary can be a tool, an aid or a resource for those four groups to help us to move the front of the ship 1 or 2 degrees at a time. And we're not looking at overnight success. And I mentioned this to Danielle and the other panelists in a previous meeting, that really we're looking for much like an evolution where it takes time. A revolution is overnight. There's a lot of damage and a lot of pain. We don't want a revolution on our hands, and we're certainly not here to be condemning anyone, because we need volunteers in sport. And if we don't have them, we don't have sport. But rather it's an evolution. So it'll take a while, and we need to be patient. And we're looking for small little incremental steps that will help to educate those involved in amateur sport to understand the advantages, the benefits, the safety that's involved in a multi-sport participation model.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. You're about to watch now is a short clip from the Give and Go Sport Education documentary highlighting key themes in participant development.
The most important thing about sports is just like moving your body and experiencing a whole bunch of different things. And I think anytime that you have a chance to play hockey or soccer or basketball or the decathlon, it's always a cool opportunity to challenge yourself in different ways. And from my experience, you just learn so much from sports. And I think that's why playing multiple sports is the most important thing. If you're an athlete, you're an athlete. Athletes play sports. They're not people that just play one individual sport. And me and my coach had this philosophy that the best athlete is going to win the Olympic gold medal. Not the best decathlete or not the person that's the most trained, but the best athlete.
There's really no bad form of physical activity. Really anything that gets you up and moving is a win in our book. The more you're able to participate in different activities, it's just going to allow you to kind of get exposure to a number of different things and find something that really resonates with you.
I see absolutely no downside in getting involved in as many aspects of sport as you possibly can.
The gift of getting into many sports is that it gives you many skills across a lifetime that you might not get from one sport.
All of the ancillary things that come from a multi-sport experience
are really where the character is developed and the life lessons are learned.
We identify kids who are great at a sport and we think, okay, the best thing to do now is keep them on this path and help them develop as the best little hockey player or soccer player that we can. But that's actually counterproductive. We want those kids to be challenged on the field of play. We want them to develop different physical skills, but also to be challenged mentally in a positive way so that they flourish and develop and thrive over time. So that multi-sport experience is critical, especially at a young age, to really make sure that we're deriving all of the benefits around sport and physical activity.
We tend to focus on an athlete developing the physical skills and the sport specific skills for them to excel. That's great. And I think that's always going to be a big part within sport. But when you are participating in multi-sport, your ability to really develop the mental, emotional skills, the ability to develop your social skills, those are all key components of how we want our athletes to be able to develop so that they become better people overall.
When you're always with the same people and always doing the same things, you have less awareness of maybe what's right and what's wrong. When you're only in one environment all of the time, you just assume that what your experience is the way things are supposed to be.
Going through the school system, we have different school teachers. We're in different classrooms. Our friends don't follow us everywhere. We've got to make new friends. That's a very holistic opportunity to figure out who you are, how you want to behave. And I look at sport the same way. If you only have one coach all your life and you only play one sport, you're really limiting some of the great and wonderful things that can come about.
Think of it as an adult who's progressed throughout their career and they've had 3 or 4 different career paths that they've followed. They're able to go back and say, wow, the lesson I learned in this role, I'm going to apply that to a challenging situation I'm currently having today. It's the same ideology when you apply it to sport for children at an early age. The more diversity of experiences they have, the more they can connect the dots in real time in a new situation to take new challenges head on.
If you stay focused in one sport, then you're naturally drawn toward this notion of win-loss and self-defining yourself by win-loss versus did you have fun out there? What did you experience in this sport today? How's that coach working with you? Did you meet new friends across many sports? It's opening the world to the child in a way that we really need to give all of our kids.
Okay, so when we talk about physical literacy, we're referring to the types of movement that are developed in adolescence: running, jumping, throwing, flipping, balancing. These fundamental skills make every other activity easier for the participant, and they're best learned when kids have access to several different sports at an early age. Each sport offers unique movement patterns, like soccer sharpens agility, gymnastics refines balance, swimming builds total body coordination. Layering these experiences develops a well-rounded motor skills that transfer anywhere. So I would like to have I have a question for Heather, actually. If a parent or coach believes specialization is the only route to elite sport, what evidence or stories would you share with them that champion a multi-sport approach?
Yeah, this is something I've been really passionate about and had personal success with, and now as a leader seen a number of athletes like take the path of being diverse and still being high performance. I think, even as I listen to some of that video, I can imagine people saying, yes, but that doesn't apply to me because I've chosen high performance. And so one of the reasons I really am interested in high performance and quality sport is that I think we often discount all of these pieces once a kid chooses a sport and they've chosen to specialize in a positive way. How do we make that a holistic experience, a positive long-term experience? From my own life, when I was a kid, I was in Kingston. My coaches and our training situation was at the university. So the university gym shut down in the summertime. I had no option to train unless I visited other gyms, which I did occasionally. But because of that, I spent my summer at the cottage. I went on canoe trips. I did other multi-sport things, signed up for summer sports. And my experience with that was, even though I was competing at world championships, so this is not just a, grassroots youth sports. When I came back, sure, did I lose a little bit short term? Day one, yeah, you sort of feel like, oh, I'm a little lost, I'm a little dizzy. But within a week, most of that was back. As long as you come back, like gradually, and the opportunity that it gave was when I came back, I was so excited to be back. I changed technique and things like that, that I was like, okay, last year I was making this mistake. When I come back, I'm not going to do this mistake. I'm going to change that. So it was an opportunity that I think was part of my long-term success in sport. And the recovery that you have during that time and that freshness you come back with is really a springboard for success and motivation.
That's great. Yeah. So by rotating sports or by taking that break, it helps to protect our bodies and our minds. And by spreading stress across different muscle groups and joints, we're lowering the risk of overuse injuries as well, and burnout, which we will touch on later. Okay, we have another short clip for you to watch from the documentary covering the topic of transferable skills.
Can actually learn a skill much better if you've done a bunch of different things. How to jump, how to throw, how to skip, how to slide. I think these are all valuable things that relate to tennis and that can be learned and developed while playing different sports such as soccer, gymnastics, hockey.
Footwork is a very fundamental skill within soccer. You use that to control a soccer ball, but you don't really kick the ball in basketball. But footwork is critical within a game of basketball. You learn that from soccer. It is 100% transferable into the sport of basketball.
If you're a young hockey player, think of the cardiovascular benefits that you could gain by being a soccer player in the summertime. Think about the eye-hand benefits that you could gain by being a baseball player.
The skills that you use on the football field as a quarterback help you as a catcher behind the plate in baseball, and they can help you as a forward in basketball in the basketball court.
I swam a lot, which I think gives you a strong base. It wasn't a competitive swimming thing. It was just swimming and being in the water all the time. And you get the soccer, you're getting a huge cardio base, constantly working as a team. Baseball, hand-eye. So when you relate to deflections or face-offs or chipping the puck out of the neutral zone, things like that, that's very much the same as bunting and any kind of contact with the bat.
Now doing the decathlon where there's so many different aspects, you have running, jumping, throwing, and all the events are so different. I'm able to draw on experiences that I had playing baseball as a kid or hockey or basketball. I don't think I'd be where I am as a decathlete if I didn't have the experiences that I did when I was growing up.
Multisport or sport sampling, it's going to allow you to develop a really vast array of fundamental movement skills, which are really those building blocks for physical literacy.
The agility, the balance, the coordination, those are all key components of every athlete. So that's what we're really looking for.
We want tennis players, but also athletes. So that's the base of everything. And it's quite obvious the ones that when they do it well, that means that they most likely done different sports. And that for us is really important.
Okay, so if you have any questions at any time for anyone from the panel, feel free to type it in the chat. But in the meantime, Mark, perhaps you can talk to us a bit about the importance of what you refer to as the ING skills and why it's so important for young participants in sport to explore multiple sports and develop these transferable skills.
Okay, that's a good question. I have to give credit to the source of the ING skills to a colleague of mine, Richard Monet from Active for Life. We had a conversation a couple of years ago, and he spoke to me about the importance of promoting the ING skills. So I asked him, Richard, what does ING sport? And he said, jumping, rolling, tumbling, falling, kicking, jumping, throw, any of the INGs are sports. And he said, we call them as ING sports. And really, they're learned, back to your reference to the physical literacy, or I should say the 8 steps to the LTAD. It starts with active, right? Then fundamental. These are all activities. We call them sports, but really they're activities that are learned before children get on the school bus. As toddlers, what we really want then is for them to continue the ING sports. We as adults call them things like football or gymnastics or lacrosse or soccer. But essentially, when you think about all the ING sports, they're inherent in most sporting activities. So I just like to credit Richard on that because they've done some phenomenal work in this area of Active for Life. And we do know, for example, that the children who continue to participate in sport, structured or unstructured, or any type of recreational activity, are more likely to continue those habits as they age. So that's going to help with mobility issues. And that's going to help them with aging. And does not help all of us really as Canadians, and even here in the province of Ontario, because there's going to be less stress, less need on the healthcare system. So it really is a win-win. I don't want to say it's a direct correlation, but I say there's certainly an association between healthy children and healthy adults.
Yes, definitely. And for a question to anyone on the panel really who wants to answer this, what are some of the issues that come with early specialization in your experience? Anyone?
Yeah, I can definitely can. As an athlete and as a coach, I'm seeing that there's so much stress for them to actually be in the gym. And we're talking about hours. We're talking about being in the gym for 25 hours a week. And so it leads to burnout, not only burnout for them to be involved in the sport beyond their years of an athlete, but also be involved in the sport in terms of coaching, in terms of volunteering, in terms of educating, giving back their knowledge. So like for me, I've changed my thinking when I'm in the gym. Why do I need to have this many individuals or these many athletes in the gym when I can actually have less in the gym and do more? And so that's something that I've seen. And then also what I've tried to also incorporate is, what that video is talking about is getting kids involved in different aspects, mentoring, go out. And I mean, we would do demonstrations in a park. We did demonstrations for spaghetti dinners. My ribbon was like on top of spaghetti, and it just made it more fun for them. And then value what coaches do, what judges do, what other even athletes do.
Yeah, even transferring those skills into a different setting can be a new experience and make it a little bit more fun. All right, we'll be moving on now to a pretty important topic, mental health, and we have another clip for you guys to watch.
There's more to the game than just showing up and picking up a racket or kicking a ball, shooting a basketball. There's a whole mental component of the game that's hardly talked about. People are harming themselves at an alarming rate now because just the pressure's so high. So everybody sees the individual playing the sport, but doesn't see what they go through at home, the struggles with their partners or their parents or their children. And that's the non-physical part we don't see, that we often don't talk about or develop.
We can't give them this whole phenomena of, if you haven't done this, then you're equates to being a failure. That is absolutely not the case. So how do we change the narrative? We have to be able to learn how to reframe what's happening and what are we teaching the kids and how are we listening to what their needs are. If not, we're going to create a lot more anxiety, we're going to create a lot more depression, and we're going to have kids want to seclude rather than include.
Something that was missing growing up was having the opportunity to communicate what was going on.
And that's the relationship part. It's relationship between parent and child. It's relationship between coach and player. If we have the ability to have these conversations and talk about how we feel about things without feeling we're going to get penalized or that we're doing something wrong, often we're also able to tap into what else is going on with this child. There's always the risk of the failure component, and the failure component can have significant amount of effects. We'll start seeing declines at school, at grade, not wanting to go to school, starting the effects of depression. And with depression often goes the anxiety, and you'll see it behaviorally. That's when you're starting to see maybe more arguments. If something's not checking out, okay, call it. Often we're very fearful to ask someone truly, how are they doing? And is there anything we can do different to help you feel better? asking the question is the first and foremost thing. Don't look the other way. When a child does specialize in a sport, the pressures can be very high to have to overperform because you don't want to let anybody down.
From an early age, because it is an individual sport, it can be really difficult to deal with the pressures.
Sport specialization is associated with more stress, burnout, and dropout from sport.
At a young age, sometimes it's difficult to cope with that and that pressure from yourself that you put on because you do want to do well, but also from the family standpoint or the coaching standpoint.
We can liken it to academic and the stress of academics for young people, how important it is for them to do well in school, to be the best among their peers as opposed to learning for the sheer joy of learning.
It's important to surround yourself with really good people that care about your development.
All right. So a little bit of a heavier topic, but mental health is becoming an increasingly important topic in youth sport. Kate, from your experience working with athletes directly, what would you say are some of the pressures and common themes that are being faced? And how can we as coaches, clubs, and parents better support their mental well-being?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the one thing I would always want to start off with is the environment of sport in general, I think doesn't support mental wellness. Our culture is very much the push through it mentality. So like, let's say like your knee's really sore, push through it. You get a rip, like push through it. Mental health doesn't really function in the same way. If we continuously push through burnout, if we continuously push through like things like anxiety, we shove emotions down because often in that push through it mentality or culture, we have to push it down so that we don't feel weak or we don't look like we're disappointing teammates or our coaches, our parents, sometimes ourselves. And what that does is it creates a lot of internal and external pressure for that athlete, which leads to things like performance anxiety, like perfectionism, and then the big piece of identity and identity for closure, meaning that our self-worth is tightly woven with our success in sport or our performance. And when those three things come together, we often get really big signs of burnout and really like losing the love for sport long term. I know a lot of athletes, myself included, sometimes we leave sport with a bitter taste in our mouth because we have pushed so much down for so long. And so I think one thing that I would say in terms of supporting this would be to really focus on, yes, the excellence and the skill that you're doing, but also the fun part of it. Like, how do we start bringing fun back into practices? And there's a lot of different ways that you can have fun while you still perfect or even condition your athletes, and build little things, little opportunities for connection and belonging. Often when I talk to athletes, they speak about how when I make a mistake, my coach doesn't like me, or if I make a mistake, then I've let my whole team down and they're not going to like me anymore. And so it's very much not tied to the skill, but tied to the, if I make mistakes, I am a bad person. If you can kind of make those fun moments in practice where people can bond, that comes a little bit, like mistakes are a little bit more digestible. The other thing I would say is normalizing mistakes and redefining what success actually looks like. And so success doesn't mean a perfect routine. Success might be that you improved or you kept a positive attitude or you actually felt an emotion and processed it in the way and you had support from your coach in doing so. And the conversation of like mistakes are human. That part is really important. And then also understanding that often when we have performance anxiety and these big mental barriers in sport, we often push mastering the skill more, whereas we should actually be pushing mastering the fear, which looks completely different than actually mastering the skill. And so what does that mean? How do we go about that? And how do we make space for that in the way that we train, understanding that it's completely different?
Yeah, it sounds like having these open and honest conversations surrounding these topics is a stepping stone to creating that supportive environment where we can all feel safe in being ourselves and making these mistakes and learning, because that's really the best way to progress, is to make these mistakes and to, you know, feel like you're safe to make the mistakes and not putting so much pressure on yourself. Yes, Heather.
Yeah, I just I totally agree with so much of what Caitlin was just saying. And I think that self-compassion bullet at the bottom partly came from like something I'm really passionate about, and something I had to unlearn and learn as an athlete, but I think have seen the biggest differences in athletes over the last few years as I worked with freestyle skiers as their high performance director at Freestyle Ontario. When coming out of COVID were the first training camps I offered, and there was this real sense of like they felt behind. There's so much pressure, like even more than usual. But high performance sport does that anyway, and I think what I really noticed is they were so hard on themselves, and the perfectionism was so high, and and I had taken that for myself in my life, and I was like, well, they haven't learned this, and I think it's one of, when we talk about transferable skills, it's one of the most important things we can teach in sport. Like sport is this mini version of life where we put pressures on ourselves for different things. We have expectations we try to achieve, and it just doesn't work without self-compassion. And there's this fear of it among athletes or among humans, that they think it's letting themselves off the hook, and if they let themselves off the hook they won't perform. But really sort of that recognizing, wow, I tried really hard, I failed maybe in this moment, and it's going to take time, and that's okay, and I can be sad about that, or I can be frustrated about that. When we mention moms as well, like like we talked about at the beginning as one of the audiences, so many moms just want what's best for our kids, right? I've done it, my fallen into this in myself as a parent, just trying to give them everything, support teams, that can feel like pressure too. So one of the things that I've sort of learned by making mistakes is to lead by modeling and encouraging self-compassion for my own kids and the athletes that I'm coaching as well. So it's like when they're upset or when they're not doing well, it's not, here's how I can help you do better. It's like, yeah, that's tough, and teach them how to feel that self-compassion, because that's often the biggest thing missing.
Yeah, giving them that validation of you're right to feel what you're feeling, and that is okay, and we don't need to change it right away, you know, allowing them to sit in whatever emotion they're feeling and then helping them with what's next.
Yeah.
So Danielle?
There's nothing wrong with them. They don't have to judge themselves.
Oh. Yes, Mark.
Yeah, so in the conversation that I had with Dr. Sonia at the Canadian Mental Health Association, she brought up a couple of interesting points that I'd like to share with the group.
Yeah.
The first point was that we're really not to create a path for the child, but rather create the child for a path. And so often we take a look at the child and say, okay, by the time you're 7, you should be here. By the time you're 9, you should be there, and perhaps 11, and then perhaps the U14, and then provincial team. We sort of have this all mapped out, almost like we're taking a trip here. Whereas, the exposure to a number of different experiences in sport or recreational activity really helps the child create some broader and greater insights to help them to grow in confidence and competence, as opposed to, you are going this way and you will be there. And there's inherent pressure there that doesn't necessarily be there. And the second point that she brought up, and this deals with the particular NSO, which doesn't need to be mentioned, but along these lines of creating a path for the child, many times single sport or specialized sport, it's at the exclusion of other sports. And when you get into these perhaps 10 months a year, 11 months of the year, all in private academies, clinics, lessons, tutoring, the drill. Oftentimes they become a teenager and they don't have summer jobs because all they've known is this particular sport. And then they get to the level where, they're thinking, okay, they should be at that next plateau, at the elite level. Perhaps they don't make it. And then what happens is, unfortunately, the child suffers from what's called an identity crisis. They don't really know where they fit in. They've been told and they've assumed and inferred that they are going to do this when they reach 18 or 19, or perhaps in gymnastics it's younger, and they don't. And they really struggle. And the unfortunate piece is those years are gone. So they don't have the life skills, so they don't do well when it comes to looking for perhaps jobs. Many of them don't have the requisite education to go on to post-secondary education. Not that it's for everyone, but if they want to, they don't have that. So it's really unfortunate. And then, I guess the last piece around the mental piece is the safety component. And I think if there's any of the three pillars of health in children, so physical, mental, emotional, I would say the mental really occupies the most space, because if kids aren't feeling and thinking well and healthy and properly, they're not going to perform well anyway. And, as Frank said in the documentary, children are harming themselves at an alarming rate. Now, it's not all because of excessive sport or specialization, but it's a part of it. And we also know that the children who participate in a variety of different sports are abused less. And this comes from the group that is Respect Group. They're now known as Headversity. But anyway, the Respect Group tells us that when children move around from sport to sport, they're able to compare. If they're in one sport only, that becomes the norm. And that's how they operate. And I think it's okay to be touched that way, or held that way, or hugged that way, or this type of a joke, or an innuendo or something. But if they have a second or third sport, they're able to compare and look back. Well, that's funny. We don't do that in sport number one. And in sport number two, it's this way. And they're able to compare and say, this isn't right. So one of two things happen. They will leave, or they'll stand up and say something. And it's just a healthier way. And very unfortunately, I was on a panel at the University of Windsor last year with a young gymnast from Sarnia. And I don't remember her name. It doesn't matter. But she was abused by a coach. And her words were she was groomed at a very young age in the sport of gymnastics. And it didn't go well. So I was really taken by her courage and her maturity to be able to stand up in an audience and speak about that. And she looks back now, it was a very unfortunate affair, but there was no openness at all to anything outside of what the coach wanted. It sort of had to be done this way. Very militaristic, I suppose, from that perspective. Anyway, so that's I just wanted to add those sites because they were great insights that I was able to get from Dr. Sonia at the Canadian Mental Health Association.
Absolutely. I love what you said about creating the child for the pathway rather than the other way around. I think that makes a lot of sense. So now we're seeing a shift in how important it is for both athletes and coaches to regularly check in on themselves, both emotionally and mentally. What practical strategies can coaches use to integrate self-awareness into regular training sessions for both the athletes and the coaches? Kate, perhaps you can touch on this.
Yeah, this is something that I really am passionate about, and what we often do with a lot of coaching teams is building into the structure of your practices how you create athlete voice or opportunities for athlete voices, and also opportunity for athletes to check in with themselves. I think as coaches, we often take on a lot of responsibility to be like team manager and to manage difficult dynamics, manage everybody's emotions, and that's a really, really hard place to be. But if we can teach our athletes to do that, then our role becomes more of a guide and a resource and a support rather than the manager of all of these things. So something as simple as like a mid-practice check-in where you ask just open-ended questions about how practice is going, and ask for like emotion words, like how are we feeling here? Like name the emotion, because emotions often are something that we don't name and don't like to talk about and don't like to feel. And so if we can encourage athletes to actually speak like this is actually really scary for me. Just voicing it, there's a rhyme I always use, name it to tame it. Just by voicing like I'm scared can really go a long way in helping that athlete to build that awareness, but also help process the emotion and not feel alone in the emotion. Often for young people, the scariest thing in the world isn't competing in front of a whole bunch of people or losing. It's the feeling of being completely alone in your emotions. And so creating spaces for that is really important.
And it's great to lead by example, because once you start having these open conversations, you start seeing that you're not alone in what you're feeling. And it can get very lonely when you're like, I am the only one who's experiencing X, Y, and Z. But when you bring in other people's thoughts and experiences, they're like, wow, like that's so similar to me. And when you can start seeing yourself in other teammates, then you start to bond and you start to feel more part of the team when you see those different sides of the other people that you're around so much of the time.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, sport gives us so much as athletes. Jen, can you discuss what it looks like to foster an environment in sport that makes athletes want to stay involved and contribute to their sport in a meaningful way beyond their competitive years as an athlete?
Thank you. There's so much that I've tried to incorporate. One of the reasons why I gave back to my sport, because just listening even to Mark, um, I missed everything as an athlete. I did not go to proms, I did not go to graduations. I was all in gymnastics. My whole summer I was out in Europe training. And so I saw this, and this is what I didn't want that for my athletes. So I'm trying to create a positive, inclusive culture that not only highlights our successes as coaches, but looking and appreciating and valuing, sorry, like volunteers, judges, going into other gyms and experiencing training with other coaches and getting their feedback and working together to make them better, whether it's succeeding at a particular skill or towards a particular competition, having them mentor each other, giving them different roles to help out each other, have the older athletes with the younger athletes and have them work together. And like just developing, I mean, there's so many other things that we can do, but trying to make it more fun, trying to understand that, you know what I'm doing right now in the gym is not going to be everything. I have to look at the bigger picture. How can I improve myself? How can I help others improve and follow my footsteps? And that's what I've tried to do. We've done, like I said, I would bring my athletes and we would be like performing, like I said, like on the grass. We would, it was, yeah, just incorporating more positive experiences other than competition. We would do different aspects of our sport. Like we would incorporate even like food. I mean, I hate to say this, but this is something that I really, really love. At the end of the week at a training camp, we all brought in our own food and we ate together. And we explained the importance of how this fuels our body and how is this going to make us better. So, I mean, that's just a totally different subject as well in itself, but a lot of different opportunities, a lot. I mean, we can probably spend a whole another webinar on that as well.
Yeah. And Heather, speaking of building a legacy, you're one of those individuals that took sport to several different roles. How did you find your experience in this and giving back to the sport that you love?
Yeah, and I think very similar to Jen that like for myself, but also I think of some of the best coaches I know out there, the best sport leaders, is they've had both positive and negative experiences in sport, but they've kind of taken the positive and their desire, or even the opposite of the negative in many cases, and said no, never again. No one else should experience that negative part that I experienced, but seeing where sport can be, and I think my mantra, and I share it in coaching courses, and LFs that have worked with me will maybe remember this, but it's like, I just 100% sport should make your life better. And my husband Sean always says, use your powers for good, like, so as you take your passion for sport, your love of sport, it's easy to get caught up in the function of it, like the have to this, have to that. If we want this, we have to do this. But really, it's like, is sport making my life better? Is it making, and not every moment will be a positive one, but overall, is the struggle worthwhile? Are the challenges something that you want to take on? Are you enjoying it? Are you feeling good about yourself in an overall sense of the word? And whether that's as a sport, administrators have a big role in this. It's surprising how big a role, actually, because how we create sport policy, how we create selection, how we organize events, all really drive this. And some of the talks I've done for coaches often end up with, they're powerless because administrators have made decisions. And then it's like, how can you work within a bad system? So, like, there's the changing the system, there's how you judge, how you speak to athletes, how you're a role model. So, and I've been fortunate to kind of jump into each of those roles over the years. And I think in the end, it's always, I think of myself as an athlete at heart, and I try to relate to that human that's, on their own journey.
Yeah, keeping that human at the forefront of everything is so important. Which actually brings us to the last clip that we have, giving an importance to kids and having a voice in their own sporting journey. When young athletes are empowered to choose what they play, they're more likely to stay active, have fun, and build a lifelong love of movement.
Want to play all these different sports. I haven't really met one kid who only wants to play hockey, unless they've been told that hockey's the only path that they can take. I look at my son, he's 2 years old. Who would I be if I told him that, oh, you're going to be an NBA player and we're just going to only play basketball? Sure, he can grow to love it, but I don't think that that's the best path.
It's so important that you let children discover what they love. The season is the reason in our home. So if it's baseball time, they're out playing baseball. If it's hockey, they're out playing hockey. As a child, I had so many times where I failed. But when I got to the sport of swimming, it wasn't just the sport. It opened a world for me where I could discover where I had strength, where I could discover how to set goals. What I've learned from sports today has absolutely led me into having a successful career, and also being here today led me into the strongest mental health fight that I would ever have. And I learned those tools in sports. So for my kids, you play everything. You commit to a team and you finish the season. And if you didn't like that sport, well, then we don't pick it up next year. We keep pushing them till they find where they belong and where they fit. Just by watching this, what if a parent encourages their child to try something new and finds that opportunity to open the door to where they can succeed, to where they feel they fit in? The biggest thing for mental health and mental wellness is feeling like you belong. So as a parent, a coach, a teacher, what a great opportunity to allow a child to connect and feel like they belong somewhere.
Those of us who had the privilege and the opportunity to try different sports look fondly on those opportunities where we learned, where we failed quickly, got up off the ground and picked ourselves up and just continued on. That's how you learn a new skill. So it's imperative that we give kids that opportunity to try as many different things as possible. We really need to give them the opportunity to chart their own course forward, as opposed to making preconceived determinations around what this child may or may not excel at the age of 6.
We might perceive that our kid wants to do a certain sport, and have we not tried out another, they might not have been opened up to it. And by doing that, they might turn on to truly love baseball. If, for instance, we thought they were into hockey, but by closing the doors, we're closing the doors on their opportunities. So it's good to have an open mind on this.
Exposing them to a lot of different sports, a lot of different teams, and then let the kids see what he likes most, right?
Try to expose them to as many things and see what sticks. When you commit to a single sport and a 5, 6, 7-year-old, like, you're doing such a disservice to them, both physically and emotionally, mentally. All those aspects of being a rounded human being are negatively affected by being a single sport athlete. You can't love every sport and you can't be good at every sport, but unless you try them out, how will you ever know?
Okay, so that was our last clip. And basically, what I want to ask after watching that is how, as adults in the sports system, we can make sure that we're supporting a child's right to choose and prioritizing their enjoyment rather than unconsciously imposing our own expectations or our thoughts about where we think that they belong, especially based on maybe where we grew up. Heather?
Yeah, I think it's easy to kind of think of your own children when you do these moments, but like, just saying yes to trying something new, even when they're committed to something else. Sometimes as a parent, it's like the finances, the logistics, but they like, I want to try this. And, I, with each of my kids, they had a year where they did hockey and freestyle skiing, and we were juggling, and they ended up choosing skiing. If they'd only, they started that team, they had to finish, but it was their choice. And sometimes, even in that moment, like, I think another part is like re-choosing and choosing what level you want to do it at, choosing how serious you want to be. And that can fluctuate, right? Like, it can be, I want to be the best ever, and then something else comes up, and you want to spread yourself over more different sports. Maybe your last year of high school, you want to play all the sports and put gymnastics on the back burner, but not lose it, right? And I think, and maybe come back to it. And so, we're seeing more and more gymnasts that are coming back to gymnastics as adults, even at a very high level. I did that after university. I came back to trampoline, and chose it for myself. I had left because I was good at it, but I felt like I was doing it for other people. I wasn't very happy. I went to pursue other things. And then when I came back with so much more power in my own choice and more confidence. And I don't think I ever would have reached the heights. Sometimes I wonder, what if I just stuck with it, right? But that passion for what you're doing, and that, real sense of purpose, it's so important to give kids and young adults the space to find that. If the purpose comes from a parent, a coach, an expectation, because they feel like they don't have a choice, it's the only thing they're good at, it doesn't make them happy, and it's just pressure instead of passion.
Yeah, as you can see, I switched the slide while you were talking because it is really giving children the space to choose, but also re-choose the sport if they choose to step away, allowing them that space and allowing them to get involved in different things, and then maybe coming back and recommitting to the sport after taking a break and coming back with a fresh set of eyes and new experiences that they can apply to this experience. Gymnastics is notoriously seen as a sport that has a significant amount of its participants specialize earlier on in life. And that's at the exclusion of other sports. So how do we make sure that kids are having fun and falling in love with the sport, but on their own terms, without feeling the pressure of succeeding too hard and too quickly? Kate?
That's a great one. I think that one of the things I tell everybody is approach situations with connection first. And so what I mean by that is curiosity. I think when we're a parent or a coach, even a teammate, we often are so focused on the goal or the thing in front of us that we lose our curiosity. And so providing opportunities where the focus is just that and nothing else. And so you learn a lot about what that person is going through, what they're thinking, what their enjoyment is, and then it allows them also to get curious about themselves. So finding times like the car rides, I always call it car talk. We all know car talk with our athletes to and from practice, or even when they're sitting in their splits, getting curious about some of the things that they like. And then I would say that encouraging off season and encouraging breaks is also something that is so important. And then the other piece I kind of mentioned before, like bringing fun into practice. Why not get some other sporting equipment in the gym and throw and catch and like actually play things on the floor. The floor is such a great surface to do so many different types of games. And so you can bring multisport into your gym and allow people to do those types of skills, but with the fun element, and then they can learn the life skills alongside them.
I remember one of my favorite memories from being in the gym is getting to play a game at the end of practice where they're like, okay, we're going to play catch the bacon. And we were all just so excited to do something else, but in the gym setting. So it really does make a difference to allow even an elite athlete that option to just breathe and step away and play a game with their friends.
I think what's important as well, Danielle, is the need for children to make mistakes. I mean, we need to make mistakes. We need to fail. In fact, I've heard many progressive coaches talk about we need to fail early and fail often. Wouldn't we rather find out at a very young age, at a very early time in a particular sport, what's working, what isn't working? And if it's not working, well, we try and mitigate the need or the use of that, or we try to address it and improve on the skill. And what's working for us is we replicate it elsewhere and we continue to do it. So I think by an exposure to a number of different sports, it helps us to understand that we have to accept that there's going to be failure. And failure isn't the end. Failure is just an opportunity for improvement. And I think of the people that are in the documentary, at least the athletes, yeah, all of them are multi-sport athletes. One of them, for example, Joe Siddle, who professional Major League Baseball catcher, does work for the Blue Jays now, actually was a collegiate football player. And then he played two sports back and forth. And then it wasn't chosen for him, he chose baseball. And we also know statistically, I know there's a lot more data in football, American football, than there is here. But just by way of statistic, something like 90-some% of the current NFL quarterbacks were multi-sport athletes in high school. And so I don't want to leverage statistics too much because oftentimes they're slanted in favor of the person who's giving the statistic. But I just want to use it as a reference point that it is okay to do and try other things and to fail. And in particular now with the devices that children have in their hands, that it's okay to not be okay. It's fine when you're not doing well and on top and confident and smiling and, you're having a great day. We have those other days. And as adults, we have them as well. So it's okay to not be okay. I think that would be helpful in terms of messaging to youth as well in sport.
Absolutely. It doesn't impact your worth and it doesn't impact your contribution to the sport if you're having an off day. And I think that it's easy to get caught up in that lie that we tell ourselves. Kate?
This will be really quick. I think all of these words they're making me really excited. And I was just thinking of something that I do with a lot of athletes, even coaches. It can be done in any setting. I've done it with management teams, but it's the game of drop it and bounce. And what that means is everybody gets in a circle, and what you're dropping in the middle of the circle is the mistake that you made that practice or that day, the thing that's like weighing on you. And so you go into the middle of the circle, you say it out loud, you name it, like, this is the big mistake I made today. And everybody like cheers for you and says like, good job. And then you can talk a little bit about it. You can like talk about a way forward or an action. So drop it, you drop the mistake, bounce is you leave it there and it's gone. You leave it on the mat. And then when you come back the next day, it's kind of like a fresh start and you feel like you have support and a whole team to kind of lean back on. So if that mistake happens again, it's less likely to have that heaviness of fear attached to it. Because often the fear comes from the social dynamics and not so much from the skill. So I just wanted to leave that there because I know sometimes everybody's like, this is great information, but how? So that's something.
I love that. That's really great to actually put an activity to what it is that we're talking about and give them a way to move forward using this information. So now we are circling back to burnout and specialization. Burnout can start to creep in when sport stops being enjoyable for the participant, especially in a sport as demanding as gymnastics is. As coaches and leaders in sport, how can we recognize the signs of burnout, and what can we do to make sure that we keep fun at the heart of the participant's experience in the gym? We'll start with Heather.
Yeah. Um, when I think of this, especially related to sport, you know, another thing that we learned a lot about leading into the Olympics was like sort of that post-Olympic depression that you often have, and so but around that time, I also saw a presentation at a Sport for Life conference where they were comparing that burnout and depression, and like this, it's so much the same, right? Like, and it's like, which one is it? And so, you know, as we are, at least, I mean, I think a positive thing right now with you know, the conversations we have today and the youth of today, they're better at telling you, you know, they are better at sharing the you know, their concern, and it's talked about. I think you know, we have to make sure our environment isn't kind of old school and not allowing space for that. But I think one of the things that's really important with this is to give yourself that space. Like, if sport isn't making your life better right now, then take a step back, take a rest. Sometimes it's just a physical rest, sometimes it's better sleep, sometimes it's just gaining perspective, and you might be back in a week or you might be back in a day. But in those moments, and I used to have this majorly after a competition, I would feel like the world was ending, life was terrible, I think I have to make huge decisions and life changes. And then a week later, and I didn't recognize it until I started seeing it in my own kids, and I was like, oh my goodness, they're exhausted, they're emotionally exhausted, they put everything they had into that event, or that, you know, they're traveling, they're not sleeping well, they're, you know, the teammates social kind of stuff that goes on, and the pressures, and they're like, life is terrible, maybe I don't want to do sport, maybe I'm so sad, where's my meaning, what's you know, all these things are bombarding their thoughts. And then it's just like, why don't you just sleep, have something to eat? Let's talk about it a little more tomorrow, but it's okay, you know? And then often they bounce back. And so I think what we do, and I think it happens too much in gymnastics, but many sports in life, is we go, okay, we have to solve this now, or we can't take a break. We're afraid to take a break because we might fall behind. And so I think just allowing that moment to step back, gain perspective, take stock, and then what that it goes hand in hand with that re-choosing as well, right? Like, oh no, I do want to be here, oh no, I do love this, and refinding your passion. Or maybe you don't, and that's also okay. I think too often we just assume that leaving sport or leaving a sport situation is a choice for an athlete. So much is about stay in sport, and it's like, but they shouldn't stay in sport if it's bad. They shouldn't stay in sport if they're not enjoying it. It might be good for someone else and not good for them. And it's okay to leave that sport and choose something else, you know? So I think there's like that break, but there's also that it's okay if that ends up being your choice.
Right. That actually reminds me of something that we used to say after every competition in cheerleading. We'd be like, oh, I have a cheer hangover. So, because everything you have gets put into this one event. And then after, you're like, you have a second to breathe, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted. So, like, giving yourself that time to rest and recover, which actually brings us into our next slide, rest and recovery. They're essential parts of growth as an athlete. How can we build a culture where having a period of recovery is seen as an integral part of athlete progress and not as a setback? Kate, maybe you can speak to this.
I think that, I mean, the way sport's structured now, in the system of it, it's really hard to step away if you're a coach that wants to implement this and your gym doesn't. I know in the world of gymnastics, cheerleading, it's often like your big end of the year competition, and then it's like tryouts and team placements and all of these different things. You're getting ready for the next season. So there's not really room to breathe. in these settings. And so as a coach, some of the things that you can do is create as much unstructured time as you possibly can within the practice setting. And what I mean by that is somewhere where athletes get to choose and get to kind of work on the things that they want to work on without as much pressure. That can also be implemented or encouraged to do outside of practice. And what I mean by unstructured time is when there's no expectations and that athlete gets to make their own expectations. And that includes putting away the phone. What I mean also by unstructured time is when there's not like bombarding of different stimulus consistently. Athlete brains, any brain, needs time to kind of like offload all of the information of the day. And so that unstructured time is really, really important and can help with the rest and recovery piece because often when we're in high performance sports, we're drilled productivity and perfectionism. And so when you go to rest, that's like going against everything you know, and it's actually more anxiety producing than it is helpful. And so I think supporting the language around the importance of that and that it's okay is also really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. I think that allowing athletes to see that they have the option to choose and they're not stuck, because that's the scariest place to be in, is when you feel like you have no choice and you have one path and that's the path you have to go down. So I think that that's really helpful. Thank you so much.
One of the things that it's just coming back to me now, the previous panelist comment, and I'm sorry because I can't see who they are, but I like that point and it triggered a memory for me. I remember from my time in Europe when I was playing professionally and coaching the youth program there, they had this thing at the beginning of a practice called, it was almost like scheduled, unscheduled. So downtime, but it was known that it was downtime. So the first 90 minutes of practice, of a 90-minute practice, the first 15 to 20 was just hang time, fooling around, having fun. And I was opposed to that because of my background coming from Canada. You know, ice time is valuable and you hit the ice and boom, you're into the drills right away. And I learned from a coach of mine who had played in 2 Olympics, was Czechoslovakian. And he talked about the importance for fun in sport. And he said, okay, Mark, you can try it your way. And sure enough, there's resistance. There was no attention. Kids were being kids. And the practice was terrible because it was so much formality and structure to it. And then when I slowly moved to this model of scheduled, unscheduled, or scheduled downtime, the first 15 minutes were fun time, but the remaining practice minutes, whether it's 60 or 75, whatever it was phenomenal because kids were able to do what they wanted to do. And it's almost like they had this unbridled energy that they had to release. They had to get it out. And once they got it out, man, the practices were very productive. And they were at their best. And they were more attentive. And we did learn more. And we did have more fun. And kids didn't come to practice late. So anyway, just a compliment there to the previous panelist who made that comment about the importance of fun and downtime. You may think it's a waste of time, but it isn't. It's actually investment in the balance of time you have with them.
Yeah, and it helps to create those associations, having memories of fun in that facility. So they're wanting to come back and come back again. Kate?
As I was listening to that, again, I was getting excited, but I was also thinking of the practical, in that it can be really tough as coaches to schedule unstructured time in a practice where parents are paying a lot of money and expecting their kids to go and practice and get all these skills. And so what is the language we use to actually support it and articulate it well? And one of the things that I like to say is practice can be split up into zones based on mental performance. And the very first zone can be the mental activation space. And the research and the reasoning behind that is that we have to figure out how to leave the day and be able to actually perform. And exactly what was just talked about is like kids need that space to kind of let loose, get out, get their brain ready to actually perform and actually practice. And so that scheduled, unscheduled time can be justified through mental activation. And that can be some of the language that you use in supporting that.
Yeah, and I think an important part of that is to just ensure that you're communicating this to the parents and explaining to them why this is important ahead of time, setting that expectation of we will be taking 10 to 15 minutes at the beginning to just get out all the sillies, like to really like get acclimatized to where we are so that we can have a more productive practice. Okay. And so I personally have been witnessing a shift with the average age of Olympians increasing and more elite athletes having longer careers. So, how can we move away from the idea of that perfect timeline for success in sport? And how do we better support the athletes to develop at their own pace with longevity in mind? Heather, if you could speak to this.
Yeah, I think, and I remember it so clearly as an athlete, feeling like I was on this timeline. There were deadlines. I had to do it faster. I think it's like the opposite of that self-compassion. Like you feel like you have to rush. But in reality, when you rush, you leave things out. You think you don't have time to make certain changes. You don't have time to consolidate or really fully understand the things that are going to be foundational for the next steps. And those things that are going to make you healthy and whole and strong enough to get through the difficult times, right? So I think one moment that really stands out for me in this way is I was at watching World Championships 2007. It was in Canada, and I had retired in 2005. And I was watching my kids running around and and what really struck me was, okay, there were 2 or 3 girls that had been at Worlds, but sort of middle to the bottom half of the field at the time when I was competing, and they were in finals. They were contenders, and it was really interesting to realize that only took 2 years. It was a huge difference, and the changes that they had made from what I remembered their jumping to what they were doing now were actually not that big. They were jumping 6 inches higher over 2 years. That's only like a quarter of an inch a month, and they were doing one more skill in their routine. Their form had improved just a little bit, but that feeling that you have to do it all at once gets in your way. Whereas if you do those like incremental small changes and you're patient with yourself over time, you're just layering on these changes and these, onto your foundations. And sometimes even the fastest way forward is to circle back. This is something I do with freestyle coaches all the time, is like just this spiral learning progression where you try a new skill, but then you circle back to your foundations, you improve it, you build on that skill. And the same thing with skill blocks or mental, like if you just circle back and rebuild and circle back and rebuild, it's often the way forward in if you just trust in that and spending that time.
Absolutely. Actually, Jen, I was going to come to you next anyway, so this is great. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I think as coaches, we have a tendency to focus on those who have the skills already and not focusing on the ones that don't. I remember an athlete of mine, she actually asked me, she goes, Jen, what did you see in me? Like I was always last. I was always this. I was always that. And I'm like, I don't know what it was, but it was just helping them not just become provincial champions or national champions or qualifying for the national team, help them to be just a better gymnast, help them with their little successes. And that's what it was. I was like, I just stayed with them and worked with them and and saw that success that happened. Yeah, they got beat up like big time. I mean, even when I first started coaching, my girls were always last and I couldn't figure it out. I'm like, what is going on? And I said, girls, just keep knocking on the door. Just keep knocking on the door, leave with those smiley faces. And it just happened because we were always there. We were consistent and they grew to love us, I guess, in a sense. They grew to love us. And so don't give up. Don't give up on those. And, you're like, you know what, maybe you should be doing another sport. Well, no, let's figure out how we can make them become that gymnast that they're capable of becoming, whether it's here or here. And that's what I mean, we need to shift our focus. A lot of clubs look at success as being, oh, you need to come to my club, you need to come to my club. No, what about the whole over, overall development of those athletes? To me, it's like I'm developing not an athlete, I'm developing a confident, because our sport is female, right? All female, a confident young women, females who can walk into a room and go, wow, you know what? Go into that, that job interview and like, okay, just she's not even posture. So we can't give up, cannot give up on those little ones. And we have a tendency to do that because we want the results.
Mm-hmm. And from a mental health perspective, Kate, maybe you can talk to the resilience that you can have in order to keep going when times get a little bit tougher and you want to step away.
Yeah, I think that the thing that I always kind of come back to is results live in the future, outcomes are future. And so if we're consistently thinking futuristic, that's where anxiety lives. And it's really hard not to have performance anxiety and all of these big feelings when we're constantly just focused on success. And so I often do an exercise in a therapy space where we talk about strengths and we talk about all of our experiences and what they taught us and how they help us grow. And that's made us who we are. Nobody can take that away from us. Our strengths are permanent, they're there. And that should be where we focus, not on the results or the goals that we have. It's good to make goals, but if that's where the focus is, then we don't focus on how to build our strengths or how to sleep well at night so that we can get our goals, or have the right nutrition so that we can get our goals, or what we learn from each mistake every time it happens. Resilience isn't not making mistakes or not failing. Resilience is failure and being able to bounce back. And again, it's not that sport mentality of like push it down and keep going. It's like make a mistake, fail, acknowledge it, process it, feel it, and then decide how you want to put your next step forward.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That was awesome. All right. So this is the Give and Go sport education documentary poster. The documentary is available right now. So if you are interested, shoot me an email. Mark, maybe you can quickly speak to the fact that it's being repurposed into an e-learning module that should be available for coaches, parents, and administrators.
Right. So we are currently working on, as you say, the repurposing of the first documentary. Let me back up. So really, we're making a docu-series. The first one was just launched last fall, and that's just Give and Go, sort of at large, because it's our first real foray into the space. The second one then is going to be called Give and Go Parents, and the third is going to be called Give and Go Coaches. And so what we're going to have is each of the documentaries are going to have an e-learning module. The e-learning module is going to be for let's call it certification purposes. There's a couple of different certification bodies in Canada who are considering it. I don't want to mention who they are. It's a little bit premature. But it's really to help us all to think a little bit differently. I don't think it really matters which the PSO or the NSO is, or what your role is, whether you're a parent or a volunteer or administrator or an educator. It's just this gradual evolutionary shift. And I think by seeing the documentary, that's one thing, that's great. But by being engaged in a learning module and having to digest the content a bit more and interact with it and provide some answers and options and quizzes and tests and things like that, So we're really excited about where this is going. And it's taken us quite a while, but we're fine, we're patient. And we look forward to working with other progressive PSOs like Gymnastics Ontario to help us to move the front of the ship a little bit, a degree or two at a time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I know we've gone a little bit longer than we said we were going to, but as I mentioned before, we did have a lot of content to cover. So for our closing thoughts, our role is to support the full journey of the participant and not just their success in competition, but like their well-being, their choices, and their lifelong relationship with sport as a whole. So thank you so much for attending, and we're going to move into a Q&A section. If you have to leave, completely understandable, but if you have any questions, just throw them into the chat and indicate if your question is specifically for someone on the panel, if it is. Tara, do we have any questions coming in?
Not yet, but I'll keep an eye.
Okay. Give it a few more seconds. Oh. Some really nice comments are coming through though. That's great. Yes. Mark.
Can I close out with a story?
Absolutely.
Okay. I think it will resonate with us once we hear it. So a number of years ago, a fellow named Edmund Hillary attempted to climb Mount Everest. It was in the early 50s. A terrible storm came in and he lost about half of his team on the face of the mountain, about a third of the way up. And he was devastated. And he came back to London, and a banquet in his honor was held and was hosted, and all the local gentry were there, the dignitaries. It was a white tie affair. And he was asked to get up and give a speech. And as he mounted the stairs up to the platform where the podium was, a large mural was sort of unfurled and rolled down behind him where he was speaking, and it sort of was a bit of a surprise for him. So he went over to the mural and he shook his fist at the mural and he said something, and then he gave his speech, and then it was over and he got a round of applause and a standing ovation. As I was descending the steps, a journalist was there and asked him, Mr. Hillier, why, what was just said there? And he explained to the journalist that he shook his fist at the mountain and he said, "You're as big as you're going to be, but I am still growing." I'll ask all of us who are here in this panel today and those we interact with to think about growth. That our past may have set some boundaries on us, but we're forward thinkers now. And the fact that you're attending this webinar and the fact that Gym Ontario is hosting it is a phenomenal compliment to all of you, that you're in the growth mode, you're in the development mode. And I'll ask you to continue that as you move forward in your actions with other people in sport, and not just in sport, but in other people. Whenever kids are there, we need to keep them front and center. And that may mean that at times we have to have some difficult conversations. We have to be uncomfortable. We have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. How's that? We have to welcome discomfort. But that's the only way that we grow, because we know that we grow by what we go through. Right. So sure enough, about 2 or 3 years later, he did climb the mountain, and he was literally and figuratively on top of the world, and he became known as Sir Edmund Hillary. So a little bit of story there about the importance of growth and not to give up.
Thank you so much for that. Tara, we have a couple questions. Did you want to read them out?
Yeah, absolutely. We have one for Caitlin, I think. It asks, how do you handle the parent who only focuses on competition results and not the bigger picture?
That's a good one. So I'm going to say this in a very small nutshell, and then if anybody ever wants to reach out for more support, I'll leave my information in the chat. So what I would say is anytime a parent comes with an idea that doesn't support our values or some of the processes or things that we have in our gym, we often want to critique and correct. or tell them why it's not good to think that way. What I like to do is, again, the curiosity piece. If you can meet them with as much curiosity as you possibly can to really learn where they're coming from. And that looks a lot like, oh, like tell me more, or like, what is it about this experience that has you thinking that way? That's really interesting. And then responding with understanding of why they actually think that way. Like, oh, that makes a lot of sense that you think that way. It sounds like you really care about this athlete. That's really, really cool. Can I tell you about some of the processes that we have here and why we have those? And then you give them an explanation of what you view as important as coach, and then you ask for collaboration moving forward. And so never in that conversation are you telling them that they're wrong or that that's not the way to think, but you're seeking to understand, you're validating, you don't have to agree with, but you're going to validate it. And then you try to collaborate. You try to share your perspective and then collaborate moving forward. If that does not help and you have a disgruntled parent or something that just doesn't fit well with your gym, then I would say to make sure that expectations are super, super clear and that you're able to put strong boundaries in place. And that's the piece, it's all hard, but that's the piece that can be really, really hard. But yeah, I would go seek to understand with curiosity, move to collaborate, make sure expectations, and then put boundaries in if need be.
Great. Thank you.
We do have one for Heather. It asks, we have a freestyle program at our trampoline gym. I find athletes having a hard time understanding the importance of basic trampoline skills to help freestyle skills. How do you help athletes see the correlation and importance of skills considered trampoline only in a freestyle class?
Yeah. It's something that I come across, and I think this happens in so many sports, right? When we have sort of a traditional way of doing things, or the sport has certain things that are goals at a high performance level. And it's one of the messages that Sport for Life always talks about, is like trying to teach to the test. And there's a tendency to do that, right? But really, having that broader foundation actually leads you to do those single sport things in a better way, or more effectively, or safer. How do you get people to buy into that? That is, like, I would say it's a constant education and a constant challenge. One thing that I use a lot is, I mean, you can choose role models that are out there already that are, doing like the freestyle kids for sure watch so much on social media of other athletes and other things. So they'll have, they may know some really good athletes that they admire. And if you look at, say, Mikhail Kingsbury for a mogul skier, I mean, he does all kinds of stuff way beyond what he uses just in his mogul skiing competition. And so that, like convincing them based on people that they may see as role models. Another one is, sneak those things in as part of your warm up, as a game, as a, it doesn't always has to be you should. Sometimes it's like a fun drill you're doing, or a game you're doing, and I often find warm up is magic, because if it's warm up, it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be their best thing. It can be like, they might not know the point of it or see the point of it, but you can point it out afterward and use that as part of their kind of ongoing education. So I think in a similar way to what Caitlin said, is like, you don't have to tell them they're wrong, but acknowledge that this is where they want to go, and then fill in some of those things along the way. And I think that applies no matter what sort of discipline of acrobatics, especially, that you're in. There's always foundational things, and people always think they need to build a tower, and really they need to build a pyramid to get to where they're trying to go.
Strongest structure.
All right, looks like there's one more. Caitlin, this might be directed to you, but anyone can chime in. How do you apply mental health awareness into summer camps?
This is exciting. So I'm assuming this is for athletes. One of the things I think that young people don't get much opportunity to do is learn who they are. And that's such a massive component of mental health, especially when we're talking about like multisport and identity crises and all these kind of things. So any activity that gets them exploring who they are and sharing who they are with other people. This could look like self-portraits. This could look like games where they start talking about their favorite foods, or what they're good at. I think one thing to really keep in mind is the strength-based approach. And so when we're in sport, in summer camps, we're often telling kids what to do, what to correct, which is a deficits approach. We approach from what is wrong and not what is right. And so to change that language in summer camp is a great place to do it, and a great place to practice it is start pointing out strengths and getting kids to notice what they're good at and acknowledging what they're good at and getting other people to see it and getting them excited about it is a really, really great space to be. The other piece I would say is any activities that connect kids' minds to body. This could be something like we just did a staff training that was hilarious. The full-grown adults had to stick their hands in oatmeal to find puzzle pieces that were like related to a whole other thing. But in that moment, they were like shutting their eyes and using their body and their minds connected together to find these puzzle pieces. So something like that is really important. Often we get really up here and we forget about the rest, and mental health is very much linked to the body as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? No? All right. Well, I want
did
to
see
thank.
one more question there from Teresa that was
Oh, amazing.
actually quite a good one. And I think one that's really, like we talk about multi-sport. So she asked in the chat, I have some athletes that are doing multiple school sports while they train, but they come to practice so tired that they can't perform things that they did in the summer months. So I think that's and when we were preparing for this, I think that was one of the things that came up with. Caitlin mentioned, athletes finding stressful because they're trying to actually specialize in multiple sports, right? Rather than kind of diversify, it's actually just like duplicating things. I think this comes down to a lot of sort of aligning goals with your athletes and their parents as well, and trying to figure out what they're really working on. So you can't just have them do exactly what they've been doing plus everything else. So, planning ahead for what the season is. I worked with an athlete in freestyle skiing who's now on the national team, but he runs ultra marathons, does like martial arts, and was trying to make the national team in freestyle skiing. And he had multiple coaches and multiple things. And one of his coaches was frustrated and talking about this. And in the end, what they did was sit down and, if you've done high level coaching courses, you've done performance planning. You can't just make your performance plan for gymnastics or whichever is your main sport. In your performance plan, you have to include those other sports and how they impact and where the rest and recovery fits in. Because if they're using their rest day from trampoline or gymnastics to do another sport, they're not actually resting. And so, but then also looking for opportunities, because maybe their other sport is really good fitness in a certain way. Maybe you don't have to duplicate that in your training because they're already getting it somewhere else. So it is a bit more work for the coach, but it's part of getting to know your athletes and making that plan. And it's kind of a back and forth thing, but still making sure they have that rest and recovery. And maybe just being more efficient with some of the things you do. You might go into maintenance mode when they're at their, for your sport, while they're at their peak of another sport.
Right. And I think that we did briefly discuss this earlier, or it was on one of the slides, that multi-sport doesn't mean that you're specializing in multi-sport, right? Like it's that participant factor and really balancing what it is that you're doing to make sure that you can excel in what it is that your goal is. Yes, Kate.
Yeah, and I see Teresa's response there that they had big goals and been disappointed. I think that is one of the challenges, is like when athletes make a choice to do multiple things, but their peer is only doing, is at a different stage or a different focus, they compare themselves to each other, but you do sometimes have to alter your timelines, or, it's setting those reasonable goals on each person's individual situation. So.
Kate?
That was so well said. I want to just speak to the pressure that coaches are under to reach certain goals. Like, how hard is it when you have pressure from athlete, from parents, from team, all of this stuff to make things happen that season, and they're coming in exhausted. I think that something really wise that was once said to me is meet kids where they're at. We can have this whole vision as a coach as to where we want kids to be, but sometimes that's not the reality. So kind of like exactly what Heather said, meet them where they're at. And again, when we meet them where they're at, that feels like there's so much pressure to like learn about this athlete, learn about what they're doing, and then adapt their training plan to fit that. That's also pressure. And so I think this is where that athlete voice comes in again, that collaboration. And so that it's still not just up to coach to figure out this massive training plan, but it's actually a collaborative effort with athlete, parent, and coach so that everybody's aware and on board with how they're going to progress through the season so that those big disappointments of where they thought they were going to be could be minimized. I hope that made sense.
Absolutely. I think that that's all the questions that we had in the chat, but yeah, I wanted to thank you all for being here. I know we did run a lot longer than initially anticipated, but I am going to be sending out a survey to see if there's anything that you would have wanted us to elaborate on more, and possibly schedule a follow-up webinar if you guys are interested. So thank you so much. And thank you to the panelists as well for being here. You guys are incredible. All right. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks to GL for organizing this. Awesome.